Good evening, and welcome to another weekly episode of Commanders Gridiron, where we talk everything Washington Commanders. And I'm your host, Steve Lockman. And let's get started without any further ado. As we always know, and it seems like, man, I say, hey, look, there'll be a while until another update about a possible name change. It seems like the name change debacle, debate, everything else is literally a weekly topic here in the DC market. And this week, there was no shortage of that. As we addressed last week and the week before and the week before that, there's been a significant push to try and get the Redskins name back to the forefront as part of the new rebranding that the new ownership group is undertaking. However, even with 100,000 plus people signing a petition to try and get that Washington Redskins name and moniker back as the official team name, this week, primary majority owner Josh Harris, along with managing partner Mitchell Rales, both came out in basically separate interviews, saying that the Washington Redskins name is officially off the table. Now, last week it was kind of rumored that that was going to happen, and even to the point that team president Jason Wright came out as a messenger through the team owners and said, "Hey, look, Washington Redskins is off the table as a possible name for the new rebrand." Unfortunately, fans got into an uproar, started chastising and just berating Jason Wright, saying, "How could you make that decision?" Blah 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 blah. And there was a lot of back and forth to the point that the owners themselves felt compelled to come out when they did a local news article with Nick Jahava from the Athletic about new rebranding and a name change. And one of the things that was brought up was, hey, is there a possibility that you're going back to the Redskins? And Josh Harris had the following statement to say that he's like, look, obviously I grew up in DC and I was there during the glory years, so I understand why fans love the former name. But look, there was a portion of our fan base that felt disrespected by the former name. Sports are supposed to bring people together and not be a distraction. I don't want distractions with our new franchise. And furthermore, to kind of reiterate that statement from Josh Harris, the primary owner of the Washington Commanders, Mitchell Rales came out in a separate interview with one of the local TV stations and said, to kind of take that even a step further, that one of the many reasons we're not looking to revisit the Washington Redskins name was twofold. A, we're not going to waste our time and money going into that litigation side of things to try and get that name back. The lawsuits that would be involved, the court battles, the politics, the whole 9 yards, yada yada yada. These group of owners and partners that have come together under this new ownership group don't want to go out and waste even more money in a battle trying to get the name back. That ship has sailed, as Josh Harris said, and Mitchell Rales as well, to the point that, hey, look, let's look to the future. Let's look to a different era, look to a different brand. Second, the other thing that was brought up by Mitchell Rales was, and something that I think a lot of fans forget in the name debate dispute, was the fact that the U.S. Patent Office would not renew or grant the patent for Washington Redskins to the franchise. So even if the team ownership said, hey, look, let's go back, let's take the Washington Redskins name, we're going to take the moniker, there's no way that it would any of that, or the licensing or merchandise or anything else, was going to be able to be patented. Now they could take the risk and still use everything. However, they'd have to keep in mind that, without that patent, then there'd be no licensing for it, which means less revenue, more competition, and being able to control who uses your logo and how it's done and all that side step. So for now, hey, look, hopefully this is the last week. I say it'll be a while until we get an update on the rebrand and the name, but it's nice to see the owner stepping up, stepping forward in this week to say Redskins is off the table. So, which kind of leads us into the next thing on the table, off the table is Coach Ron Rivera in the hot seat. So, as a lot of people know, Ron Rivera is in year 4 of a 5-year contract. And there is a lot of speculation that, hey, what's going to happen with Coach Rivera after the season? There's even some speculation from some of the passionate fan base that Ron Rivera is going to be let go during the season. I don't see that happening. I don't see the new ownership being that jumpy to fire Coach Rivera in the middle of the season. It doesn't really serve a purpose. However, what I do see happening is a couple things. I don't think they would have brought Eric Bieniemy in to be the offensive coordinator if there wasn't some kind of agreement or talks behind the scene that said, "Hey, look, you leave Kansas City, you come here, run the offense, and then a year, 2 years from now, we're going to give you that head coaching spot." So then it kind of becomes a discussion between coach, ownership, um, the whole 9 yards to say, hey, look, what's happening, what's going on. So, once again, being the primary principal owner, Josh Harris comes out and says, you know, we this here's what we're going to do. So, and a lot of it was based off the DC media saying, hey, what's going on? Is Rivera going to fulfill his contract? Not only this season but in 2024, yada yada yada. So, and Josh Harris kind of does what Josh Harris does, right? And kind of sidesteps the question, but also gives some insight into how they're going to approach this season with the head coach and possible extension, possible lame duck season, blah 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 blah. And his first statement was, "We have to deliver the wins on the field," which I wholeheartedly agree. Right? If the coach can deliver wins on the field, then it becomes a moot point. Is he going to get is it enough to get an extension? Maybe not, maybe, but it'll be enough to at least help him fulfill the length of his contract, which runs through 2024. So Josh Harris continues to say that, you know, I've really enjoyed getting to know Coach Rivera. He's a good man. He's done a great job getting the team to where it is relative to where he got it when he started. We've said we're getting up to speed. We want to hear how you think. We want to learn how you make decisions. We want to learn how you run the team. And it's going really well. Everyone who coaches in the NFL or in the NBA, since he's a majority partner as well for an NBA team, and us as owners, we all realize that ultimately we have to deliver wins on the field. So you don't really need to say anything else. It's just out there. But so far, so good. So, you know, looking back at that kind of gives Ron a little bit of leadway or a little bit of string, a little bit of rope, to say, hey, look, you're not on a tight leash yet. And I don't see that happening this season at all. Are they going to let him go at the end of the season? Maybe. They could go that route. And then what I would venture them seeing is one of two things. Either A, they let go of Rivera at the end of this season, minus the fact that he doesn't make, the team doesn't make the playoffs or get a playoff spot or even a playoff victory, or one of two things, or they possibly, which might make things a little bit more complicated, they kind of let him go into his final season as a lame duck season. So we know, kind of goes back to what we just talked about at the beginning of the show. We know that there's going to be a rebrand coming probably at the end of 24 going into 25 season. Is that the time that the team ownership group says, hey, look, that's when we're going to bring out a new brand, going to bring out a new team name, going to bring out a new mascot, logo. Oh, by the way, we're going to bring out a new coach. So therefore we wouldn't have to necessarily fire Ron Rivera this season. We let him basically go through the final 5th year of his contract kind of as a lame duck. And, at the end of your contract, we're just not going to renew it. And, oh, hey, EB, you're still here. Bam, it's EB's team. Um, Either way, whether they fire Rivera at the end of 24 or at the beginning of 24 into this season for underperformance, not quite making the playoffs, which, as we go through the season and even last week's preview, we kind of see that's going to could be difficult for us, right? I could see them not bringing him back for next season and firing from his contract and giving the team to EB, or they let him come, they let him do year 5 of his contract, kind of as a lame duck, help EB get into that head coaching role, and then as part of the rebrand going into 25, that's when we have a new head coach as well. So is he necessarily on the hot seat? I don't think so. However, his track record isn't the greatest. Even so far in Washington in 4 years, or going into the beginning of his fourth season, he's only at a 46% winning percentage, which doesn't really sound that good, but in the essence, it's not really that bad either because he's pretty much been around 500 or a game above 500 each of his years. Now, the one thing we do have to give tremendous amount of credit to Ron Rivera for, and I'm actually a huge Ron Rivera fan, is the fact of what he started with and where he's at now. Let's be completely honest, right? When your owners are the worst in the NFL on so many facets and fronts that it's not funny, it's hard to be the head coach. When the majority of your press conferences aren't about the players on the field or how you performed or, injury reports or anything else, but more so, the shenanigans, the investigations, the latest reports and headlines in a negative fashion that your owner is in, like that makes things so much more worse. So here you have a guy, and I think he was the right man to come in and do this because I don't see too many other coaches coming in to deal with the ownership issues that he had with Snyder for the last 4 years or last 3 seasons. Let's be honest. You know, Turn around a culture in DC, get guys to buy into that culture. Oh, by the way, your team sucks. Your ownership sucks. The environment is terrible. So we don't have free agents that want to come here. You know, 80% of your drafting is overshadowed or even questioned and or made by team ownership and not necessarily who is necessarily the right pick for your team. And the list goes on and on. So I give credit to Ron Rivera. He's done a tremendous job over the last 3 years. It's definitely going to be interesting to see how we do this year with now that that distraction is gone. And, it's time for the team to perform because, as we said, it basically goes back to, wins on the field, which, you know, week 1 just finished up last night in the NFL. And oh, by the way, we got ourselves a victory this week, right? Now, let's be honest. The victory in Arizona, yes, as Eileen says, hey, it was a nice win. A win's a win, and I'll take it. It wasn't pretty, but you know, as we just said, that wins the win. Yeah, the Cards scored more points than I thought they would too, Eileen. Um, and in some ways, this is almost like a trap game, right, for us. Arizona was Kyler Murrayless going into this game. They cut Colt McCoy as their quarterback. They picked up Josh Dobbs on like August 24th or something like basically the last week of August, and added him to the active roster. So all the ingredients were there for us to be basically have more than 20 points, make this a lot more lopsided than it needed to be. But in true Commander fashion, unfortunately, we made it a tight game. We allowed it to be a tight game, you know, coming down to fourth quarter play and, who do we rely on the most? Our defense, and that's where it came through, right? But as we all know, the Commanders won 20-16. And, one of the things you're going to hear throughout the season numerous times on this show is, we're going to call out the good. And on the flip side, when there's bad, we're going to call out the bad. So, you know, the weather certainly didn't help. It was overcast. It was kind of rainy to start the game, and it's basically sloppy. And let's be completely honest, that's exactly how the Washington Commanders came out of the locker room to start the game under a sold out crowd of 68,000 plus, new ownership group, lots of alumni showing up, the whole 9 yards. And, in the first quarter, basically we're laying a dud. Um, we just didn't look, fluid. There are some penalties. They, we just didn't have that balance that we needed to. They all false starts, holdings. We just didn't look like a team that was gelling, which to some extent I can understand being week one. However, being week one against the Arizona Cardinals, a team that we should have went out and easily put like 30 points up against, like there's no excuse for the way we came out on offense. But, it's certainly something that, is worth looking at. The nice thing is, as you look at the game, everybody, whether it's defensive, whether it was offensive, EB, and even Coach Rivera, has like, hey, look, I'm happy. I'm proud we got the W, but there is so much more that we need to fix and just need to, you know, make sure that we get ready for next week. But it's interesting that, as we look at some of the things, some of the facts from the game, that, you know, basically what happened was each quarter is kind of like a baseball score, right? First quarter was 7-3 Washington. Then by halftime, it went 13 to basically 13-10 Arizona. We came back. Actually, we gave up a field goal in the third quarter, which made it 16-10. And then in the fourth quarter, when the defense decided to show up, hey, this is what we do. Then we scored 10 points and we ended up winning 20-16. But let's break it down and see where exactly that scoring came from. One of the things that I kind of pointed out in last week's show as we were previewing this game was, not to overlook Josh Dobbs. Just Josh Dobbs isn't that elite level quarterback like you're going to get in Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott, yada, yada, yada. But he's a mobile quarterback, and we don't do well with mobile quarterbacks. So, and what do I mean by that? Well, Josh Dobbs didn't have quite a bad day, right? He was 21 for 30 with 132 yards. Unfortunately, there was no touchdowns in that, which, for them, it goes back to the offense. So where did their scoring come from? Well, they had 3 field goals, one in each of the first 3 quarters. And then basically that one lone touchdown that they had came off of defense when Howell got a strip. Basically, Howell was strip sacked at like the 10, 13-yard line, and the defense picked it up and ran it into the end zone. So even though the defense showed up for them and was able to get a touchdown off of a turnover, this game easily could have been 20-9, Washington, and maybe even 27 or 34 had that strip sack not gone that way. And, even one step further than that, as we will get to here in a second with our game balls and gassers, there's a critical fumble that basically killed a drive when Antonio Gibson decided to fumble the ball and, another turnover for the Cardinals. But, when we look at some of the highlights for, or even the game leaders, especially on offense for the game, as I just alluded to, Josh Dobbs had 132 yards on 21 out of 30 pass attempts. Rushing leader for the Arizona Cardinals was James Conner, who basically had 14 carries at 62 yards. So, it's not a bad day, 62. The average wasn't necessarily good, which kind of leads to our defense, our defensive front 6, front 7. We predominantly played in the nickel for the most part, playing that 4-2 front. Then, of course, Moore was their leading receiver with only 3 catches for 33 yards, basically 11 yards average. On the flip side of that, we have Sam Howell, who was basically 19 of 31, 202, 1 touchdown, 1 passing touchdown, 1 rushing touchdown, 1 interception. So, it was good for him, good management. Other than the strip sack and the interception, wasn't that shabby of a day. Brian Robinson led the way offensively for rushing for Washington with 19 carries and 59 yards. And Curtis Samuel also led the way for the receiving corps with 5 receptions and 54 yards. So, overall, it wasn't that bad of stats, but then again, it was Arizona, right? So then, as we alluded to earlier, well, where did the scoring come from? Okay, so in the first quarter, Washington decides, Sam Howell was able to make that connection for a short 7 yard touchdown pass to Brian Robinson. Extra point sounds dumb. Extra point was made by Joey Sly. Pretty critical for him, right? Because that was one of the question marks going into the season was, is Joey Sly going to be good enough to be a lot more accurate on his extra points? And, even after the kicking competition, so to speak, with Michael Badgley in preseason, he ultimately turned around and went back to Joey Sly. So Joey Sly did what Joey Sly had to do, and that was put it through the uprights. Oh, but just wait. In the first quarter, Matt Prater, who's been around for a while, kind of old faithful as the kicker. Do kickers ever, I think that's like all kickers, right? They get old and gray and they're still kicking. But Matt Prater was good enough to kick a 28-yard field goal. So at the end of the first quarter, it was 7-3 Washington. But then Arizona comes right back in the second quarter. Prater again nails the long ball, 54 yards. Now it's 7-6 Washington. And then that's when, the first drive kind of gets stalled, kind of gets derailed. Howe is strip sacked, after basically like a 4-play drive that only went 10 yards. And actually, I guess by the time he dropped back and was strip sacked, it was like a 4-yard fumble recovery into the end zone. Matt Prater gets the extra point, and now it's 13-7 Arizona. Ooh, man, hey, got to rub those hands. Like, what's going on? Why is Arizona beating us, right? Not to be outdone, Joey Sly turns around on 2 drives later, kicks you a field goal, 30-yard field goal. It's now 13-10 Arizona going into halftime. Not the best first half performance by us by any stretch of the imagination. But what do we do if one of the things we were always looking for and focused on for this season, especially, was how we were going to make adjustments? Was EB going to be good enough to make those second half adjustments on the offensive side of the ball? Is Jack Del Rio going to be good enough to make the adjustments for the defensive side on the defensive side of the ball? And fortunately for us, now granted it was the Arizona Cardinals, both the offensive and defensive coordinator did what they needed to do and came out in the second half ready with their respective units to play ball. And that was not more evident than basically the defense being able, to come out and hold the Arizona Cardinals to 86 yards on 6 possessions in the second half. So, like, that's stupid crazy, right? To the point that, by only giving up 86 total yards in the second half, they allowed only 210 total yards in the game. Now, once again, we got to preface that it's the Arizona Cardinals, but that's still a stellar day. As we kind of look ahead here at the end of the show towards Denver, we'll talk about that later. But of the 210 yards that the Commanders defense gave up this week, only 96 of that was rushing. So, they were able to hold Arizona Cardinals to under 100 yards rushing. Once again, it's Arizona, but it's a good stat. It's a good building block to work off of. When we held the team to less than 100 yards rushing, we held the team to overall just over 200 yards total. So it's definitely a good building block, and one that, as we saw going into the second half, they were able to get rushes. They were able to get Josh Dobbs on the run. They were able to get some sacks. They were able to get some turnovers. And, ultimately that's what ended up helping us seal the victory. As, in the fourth quarter, Sam Howell had a 6-yard touchdown run. Once again, Joey Sly knock it in. Perfect day for extra points. Then, to kind of help seal the deal, with just over 2 minutes left in the game, Joey Sly, 33-yard field goal. Crossing my fingers, holding my breath, because that's usually where he messes up. End of the game, field goals. But, he's good enough to come through. So, Washington once again pulls out the 20-16 victory over Arizona. Like I said, Arizona isn't, there's a lot of talk about, hey, is Arizona tanking for next year because they don't have Kyler Murray for the first 4 to 5 weeks? Are they not really that good? Are they just super shitty? Do teams play down to them? Is it a trap game? Yada, yada, yada. But, look, each NFL team is out there trying to do the best they can. And, it was a game that we needed to win It was a game we should have won. It should have been not as close or coming down to the last 2 to 3 minutes of that game for us to win, but it's a win nonetheless. Which, consequently, when you're playing in arguably the hardest division in the NFL with Dallas, Washington, and Philadelphia and New York, starting off that week 1-0, alongside Dallas, who's 1-0, and Philadelphia, who's 1-0, and only having one team in a division that's 0-1, that's huge for us, right? Going in, because this is a game that, basically all the bettors and the previewers had us winning, and we needed that because each game from here is gonna get a little bit more difficult. So we'll kind of see what happens going forward. Now we're gonna take a quick break. Hear from our sponsors here at Out of the Box Sports Network. All right, the first one is 1-800-HURT-123. It's Attorney Big Al, Jason Fine, who is AKA Attorney Big Al, for all your motor vehicle accidents, slips and falls, workman comps, personal injury claims. He's got 3 office locations throughout Pennsylvania and New Jersey, 1 in Philadelphia, 1 in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, 1 in Pittsburgh. So for all of your legal needs, reach out to Jason Fine at 1-800-HURT-123. Dugout Mugs. Get your Dugout Mugs. Use promo code OOTBSports20 at dugoutmugs.com for your 20% off your order. As baseball pushes to the end of the season and makes the playoff runs, and your local favorite team is hopefully in the playoffs, grab a Dugout Mug, put your favorite cold beverage in there, and enjoy the game. Once again, use promo code OOTBSports20 for 20% off at dugoutmugs.com. And last but not least, Monkey Cult Coffee, the evolution of flavored infused coffee with 3 new roasted blends: Sumatran blend, the toasted almond, and the bourbon chocolate chip. Use promo code OOTBSports at Monkey Cult Coffee to get your discount on there as well. They got cups, mugs, shirts, and all things coffee related. Pick up one of those 3 new brands at Monkey Cult Coffee using promo code OOTBSports. All right, as we dive into the second half of tonight's show, one of the things that we do, since we kind of recapped the bulk of the Arizona game, look, it wasn't overly exciting. It wasn't flashy. We didn't put up a ton of yards, a ton of catches, a ton of sacks, turnovers, yada, yada, yada. But there's definitely some gassers and game balls to be given out, right? And some of those things that, we look at when we give up those, as we give out those game balls and gassers was, we'll start with the gassers. And basically I try to do 2 or 3 a week in guys or units of the team that, hey, look, just didn't quite cut the mustard this week. Maybe made some mistakes, whether it was penalties, whether it was turnovers, missing assignments, yada, yada, yada. But basically, you know what? You didn't do good enough this week. You're going to run some extra laps before next week. So you're getting the gassers. And the first one that I kind of started off with this week is Logan Thomas, starting tight end for the Washington Commanders. Now, look, I will give some credit where credit is due that he did have 4 receptions for 43 yards. So, hey, look, he did have a 10-yard average catch, but he was targeted 8 times. And part of that 8 times that he was targeted was easily 2 to 3 more catches for over 10 to 15 yards each that would have extended the drives, gotten the automatic first downs, would have kept drives going, moved them down the field, moved the change, kept the momentum going, wouldn't result in punts and or the, strip sack, yada, yada, yada. So when you're the starting tight end, one of the things you got to do is twofold, right? You gotta be able to catch the ball, AKA a la, Travis Kelce, Jason Kittle, esque tight end work, on offense with the hands. You got to be there. You got to make the grabs. So only going 50% for your catches isn't good enough in our league, especially for our team. And then the flip side of that was you got to be able to block, and that's kind of one of the reasons why he is getting one of the gassers for this week. Is even though he had 4 good catches, he should have had more. He had literally had like 3 more that bounced off his hands, kind of like Tony in Kansas City on Thursday night. But let's be honest, Logan Thomas definitely slacked a lot, and it showed on the blocking offensively. So there were definitely times where either A, because of his lack of blocking skills and let's call it enthusiasm for lack of articulation, to be able to make that block, there was either a penalty and the fact that he was holding illegal blocks, illegal motion, shifts, or whatever to try and make up for that. Or B, he flat out missed the guy and it resulted in one of the 6 sacks that Washington ultimately gave up. So, unfortunately, Logan Thomas, you get the first gasser of the 2023 season. Second one, and you can't really pick out a specific player, so I'm just going to lump them all together and be like the offensive line gets the second gasser. While they didn't necessarily play terrible, they could have done, the a lot better to the point that, Sam Howell only had 202 yards. Doesn't sound like bad, but it's not nearly enough in today's passing league, right? So it comes back to the fact that, the offensive line could have did a lot better. They gave up 6 sacks, probably a couple more than you'd like to see, but it is week 1. Had a bunch of penalties, especially in the first quarter, actually in the first half, first and second quarter. So it's definitely going to be one of the things that EB is definitely cleaning up this week as they look to go into Denver next Sunday, to get that unit more cohesive, right? There's a lot of times that Sam Howell was being rushed and couldn't get through his progressions and his reads to find the open receiver. There's a lot of times where the holes weren't there for Robinson or Antonio Gibson, going into to try and find that hole for rushing. So, can they do a lot better? Yeah. Did they make some decent mistakes that, only allowed them to score 20 points at the end of things? Yeah. So, unfortunately, the offensive line is getting the second gasser for tonight. The third one, I was kind of thinking about, and I was like, maybe do I only go with 2? But hey, you know what? In true fashion, you can always find somebody that messes up. And unfortunately, as much as I love this individual, and he's one of the coolest cats on the team, like he's getting the third and final gasser for week 1. And that is Antonio Gibson. Antonio Gibson didn't do too bad. I mean, he only had 3 carries for 9 yards. So, he was below the league average of 4.5 yards a carry at 3. He did have 1 catch for 10 yards. He only was targeted once, which is kind of surprising. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was, as we go back to last week, previewing this game, when you have so many people on your team, how are you going to distribute the ball? Because I know that they were trying to look to get Antonio Gibson involved into the game a lot more as one of the playmakers. But, when you have Curtis Samuel, Jahan Dotson, Terry McLaurin, 3 tight ends, Brian Robinson, you only got so much rock to go around, right? So it was definitely a subpar day for AG, but unfortunately, he had one of the biggest bone plays of the game, which killed a great drive that was going when he coughed up the ball. And unfortunately, fumbling has been a problem of his, even going back last year and the year before. I thought we kind of had it figured out at the end of last season. He was doing really great. Didn't fumble, and then lo and behold, in week 1 of the 2023 season, boom, out goes the ball, and Arizona Cardinals pick it up, and they got some points off of it. And let's be honest, when a team can get points off of a turnover, even though it's a field goal or a touchdown, that usually doesn't spell well for your team in the long run, right? And unfortunately, him fumbling that ball, hopefully it was a one-time fluke and not a long-term thing. Hopefully he's going to get better and not cough up the ball. So since we got rid of the negative, hey, let's talk about the positive, right? Who had the good games for the Washington Commanders this past week? I think first and foremost, as we look at the 3 game balls we give out, Yeah, I'm not giving one to Josh Harris. Even though the team gave him his first official game ball, for the week 1 victory of the new ownership group, yada, 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 whatever. Throw that out the door. We're talking about on the field performance. And the first one I think has to go to EB. Even though I can criticize EB in one breath and say, hey, look, you didn't have the best balance of offense for this team in week 1, it was definitely a lot more pass happy to run happy than what we kind of would like to see. He made a lot of good adjustments. He made a lot of the right calls for the unit and the group of guys that was on the field at the time, right? So when he's subbing tight ends in and out, when he's subbing wide receivers, and knowing how Arizona is responding defensively to what they're trying to do, EB always seemed to kind of stay one step ahead, which we've never really seen before, right? Because in the Scott Turner era of football, it was always the same thing every other play. Nope, not taking long ball shots down the field. Always trying to do trick plays or run variations of the screen or whatever. And it just never seemed to. It always seemed like our wheels were turning with Scott Turner. But with EB, everything seemed to be a little more up tempo. Seemed we didn't have any delayed games. It's even though we had some offensive penalties and holding or illegal procedures, yada yada yada, get all that shit cleaned up, and we'll be a lot better for week 2. But I think overall, EB did a decent job for his, season debut with the Washington Commanders as offensive coordinator. Definitely gives him something to build upon. Second game ball, got to go to the Jonathan Allen. I know the defense and all of the defense was pretty stout in the second half, led by the front four, even though they were Chase Youngless in this game. Montez Sweat had a really good game. Deron Payne had a really good game, but especially in the second half when Jonathan Allen had 3 tackles, 1 sack, and I think a batted ball as well, just in the second half alone, that, either helps stall drives for the Cardinals or resulted in a loss of downs as well. That's huge. And, we don't sign him to a big contract extension in the offseason for no reason. Hey, that's why we pay you the big bucks. You're supposed to go out there, you're supposed to perform. And quite certainly he did. Awesome dude. I've met him before in the offseason and great to talk to. Off the field, even better talent on the field, and he's definitely a force to be reckoned with. I noticed this morning, I think it was Pro Football Focus, that Jonathan Allen was actually rated as, I think it was either number 1 or number 2 defensive lineman for week 1 in the NFL as a whole. So even though the team performance wasn't the greatest, we only escaped with a 20-16 victory. Jonathan Allen was recognized for the significant impact that he had with his defense in week 1. Last but not least, I think the last game ball has to go to Sam Howell. So Sam Howell finished the game 19 for 31, 202 yards and a touchdown, added 11 rushing yards and a running touchdown, 6-yard touchdown run on the ground. He also threw 1 interception, lost a fumble, and was sacked 6 times, probably 2/3 of which weren't on him. They were on the offensive line, whether it was, letting guys go, not knowing blocking assignments, changing the blocking package, and resulted in a sack. So I think only like 2 to 3 of those sacks were actually on Sam Howell per se. Obviously, the strip sack was huge because it was a drive killer. Clean that up. That doesn't happen. We're good. Interceptions are going to be interceptions. I don't expect Sam Howell to go every game without throwing an interception, but if he can minimize that to 1 or none every game, I'll be certainly happy. And, as luck would have it, it's kind of funny that I looked at the box score for the game yesterday, and Sam Howell finished with a 45.4 QBR. And even that stat line of 19 for 31 for 202 with one passing touchdown, 1 rushing touchdown, and 1 interception with that QBR rating, and the ultimate rating of 77.6 overall, like that was still as goofy as it sounds. I get it. It's only week 1 in the season, so let's kind of give him his props and the credit where it's due. But he had a better week than Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, and I think there's like two other quarterbacks, right? All these elite guys of the NFL, and Sam Howell had a better stat line and quarterback rating than those guys. Is that going to last throughout the season? No. I'm going to be honest, it's not. But, hey, let's give him his week of glory. He did what he needed to do. And I even said that going in, as we looked at the season preview last week for the season. He doesn't have to put up flashy numbers. We need to do more than 20 points to win more games in this league. He's going to have to boost that up to at least 30 each week going forward to win against a lot of the teams on our schedule. But he did what he needed to do yesterday to get that win, right? And as I alluded to last week, he reminds me and needs to have that prowess of Alex Smith in game management. Put up enough points to give you the win, but also be able to manage the game, few turnovers, as well as, few turnovers, limit the sacks, limit the mistakes, and you come out with a W. So those are the three game balls: Eric Bieniemy, Jonathan Allen, and Sam Howell. So as we shift gears, we look at the upcoming game this coming Sunday as the team travels to Mile High Stadium out in Denver, Colorado, to face the Denver Broncos. Now, one of the things that we need to look at as we kind of preview the game for next week is, what did Denver do yesterday? As we all know, Denver is on year 2 of the Russell Wilson experiment and year 1 of the Sean Payton coaching era. So yesterday in their inaugural meeting, start, I guess is more the appropriate term, they played the Las Vegas Raiders at home and actually lost 17-6. The Raiders were victorious 17-6. But then we kind of break down, what did the Denver Broncos do yesterday? Okay, Russell Wilson was 27-34 with 177 yards and 2 touchdowns. Javonte Williams, whose first game back from an ACL tear, I think it was ACL or Achilles, some devastating injury from last season, came back with a decent, respectable 13 carries, 52 yards. And actually, it's kind of interesting because they are Jerry Jeudy-less out on the end, was that Sammy P. Ryan, who used to play for the Commanders a couple years ago and was released, and I think he went to the Bengals, went to the Bengals, and then ended up with Denver this year, was actually the leading receiver at 4 receptions and 37 yards. So, then you got to look at, okay, well, what did the Broncos really do, right? So even Russell Wilson was kind of Russell Wilson. Was it the new offense? Was it the new coaching style regime? But he threw the ball for 34 times, completed all but 7 of them, which is a really good completion percentage. Had 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. And that's, other than the yards being low, that's kind of the numbers that I want to see Sam Howell with. 2 to 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Love to see that number over 300 yards, but in the 34 to 35 pass attempts range, right? So then, we're looking at, the numbers that kind of jump out at me, though, was Denver as a whole only had 260 yards. Now, granted, let's go back and compare. Hey, look, Arizona was Arizona. Arizona didn't have a good quarterback. They didn't really have a stellar offensive line, wide receivers, yada, yada, yada. But Washington held Arizona to 210 total yards. Las Vegas held Denver to 260 yards yesterday. Of those 260 yards, 166 was passing and only 94 rushing yards. Washington held Arizona to 96 passing yards, or 96 rushing yards, sorry. So I definitely see the potential for Washington to hold Denver to less than 100 yards rushing next week. So then the caveat's going to be, okay, so if we can hold Denver to less than 100 yards rushing next week, then what's Russell Wilson going to do to us through the air? Can we hold him to less than 200 yards passing? If Jerry Jeudy is out again next week, which he very well may be, I definitely see that as as a possibility. When P. Ryan was your leading receiver at like 37 yards, that means Cortland Sutton wasn't a very big factor in the game. And, Sutton wasn't a factor, Troutman wasn't a factor, and, Brandon Johnson wasn't an over big factor. But those are basically their starting receiver cores, in Troutman, Sutton, and Johnson, barring the fact that Jerry Judy isn't on the field. So, those guys definitely put up some numbers 37, 34, 32, 31 yards, respectively, receiving. But overall, for 177 yards, it's something that we can definitely defend. Now, looking ahead, obviously, you know, going out to Mile High, Denver is a hard place to play in. Elevation, oxygen levels, yada, yada, yada. A little bit of jet lag. We don't necessarily do overly well on the road. However, it's going to come down to what we allow Russell Wilson to do. And what I mean by that was it goes back to the beginning, our season preview last week of mobile quarterbacks. Dobbs didn't kill us, but we weren't necessarily completely able to contain Dobbs the way we should have, right? So it's definitely going to come down to a defensive battle, our defensive unit versus Russell Wilson. And I say that because I feel that we can limit Russell Wilson in a passing mentality in view, but his legs, look, Russell Wilson might be one of the older quarterbacks in the league, but Russell Wilson is still Russell Wilson. And when he wants to be mobile, he can still be mobile. So, how is that going to affect us? I think we're going to be able to do well enough that we can contain Russell Wilson. If Russell Wilson only puts up 260 yards total against the Las Vegas Raiders, then I would hope that our Washington Commanders can do those exact same numbers or a little bit better. So, is Russell Wilson and Sean Payton going to be able to figure this out in a week? Are they still going to be without Jerry Judy next week? We know how P. Ryan plays. We know what Williams is going to be bringing as a running back. Is he still 100% from his leg injury? I don't know. I don't necessarily know if we're going to see that going into next week. So hopefully, the defense says, hey, look, we're going to have the same defensive performance that we did against Arizona. The goal is to, let's hold it to 100 yards rushing. And if we do that, that's what Vegas did. Hey, can we hold these guys to less than 300 yards total? Giving Denver the option that, hey, look, we're going to give you another 40 yards passing or 40 yards total, 40 yards passing. I think that's not unrealistic for our defense. We got some ballers. Now, the only bad part is that Rodriguez is in concussion protocol. Our second round, or Martin, our second round draft pick, was the cornerback is in concussion protocol from Sunday. So hopefully he's cleared by Wednesday, Thursday, able to go. But if not, we got guys that can fill in. Now, offensively, Denver isn't really a stout defense. So if we can clean up what we need to clean up on the offensive front, keep ourselves from shooting ourselves in the foot with drives, whether it's a strip sack fumble for a touchdown, whether it's an interception, whether it's, putting the ball on the ground by running backs, et cetera, et cetera. If we can limit those mistakes, which I feel like we can, then, we should be able to put up some more points than what we did last week. Now, having said all that, I think the magic number for us is literally going to be at least scoring 24 to 25 points to get the win in Denver. If we don't score at least 24 points in Denver, we're not winning this game. It's kind of that simple, right? I feel like we can limit Denver to at least 20 to 21 points this game. So, so I think looking at, how Denver did yesterday against Las Vegas and Jimmy Garoppolo and Josh Jacobs, and that Josh Daniels offense and team defensively, and looking at how EB is going to get our guys ramped up, hopefully get the mistakes out, hopefully get more consistent with Sam Howell. Sam Howell, a couple less mistakes, the offense, a couple less mistakes, and the defense balls out like we did this week. I think this game is going to end up being like a 28-21, 31-21 game for Washington. And, as dumb as it sounds, this is going to be a, the first must win already of the season for Washington, because after this, it doesn't get any easier with, Buffalo, in no particular order, Buffalo, Philadelphia, and somebody else, in the next three out of 4 weeks. So, we need to start the season 2-0 in order to help kind of propel us into the first month and a half of the schedule. So, even though the betting line right now, 5 days out, is putting the Broncos at -3.5, which, let's be honest, you're basically getting 3.5 points from the betting favorites just because you're the home team anyhow. So even, the guys in Vegas don't know which way this game's going to go, because it's pretty much going to be, a flip of the coin in that regard, who's going to win. But hey, we're going to give Denver the favor because they're home. So they got the 3.5 points right now. That could change by the end of the week, depending on injury reports and how things are shaping up for the game. So right now it's pretty much a dead heat. But I think if we can put out the same effort defensively, better performance on the offensive front, we're going to win this game, like I said, around 28-21, 31-21 Washington. At least I hope so. God forbid we only score like another 20 points, because then it's going to end up like this game here against the Vegas Raiders that, Vegas won 17-16. If we only score another 20, 21 points, then it's literally going to be like another 20, 21 to like 18, 17, 18 for Denver Broncos. I still think we sneak out the victory, but I think it could be a close game. Like I said, it's going to come down to Russell Wilson. Which Russell Wilson are we going to get? Are we going to get the Russell Wilson of last year and last week, this past Sunday? Or are we going to get the Russell Wilson from Seattle days, where he was able to sling the ball? He was able to use his feet when he needed to, minimize the mistakes, and kind of go from there. So we shall see. So, we'll be interested to see what kind of headlines make it between now and Sunday, what the injury report looks like between now and Sunday. And then, hey, we're going to sit back. We're going to enjoy the game on Sunday. Hopefully Washington comes out with that much-needed W to make us 2-0 overall, 1-0, going forward. And, we need to start racking up those wins as we can. And we'll see what happens. So before we close it out, we're going to talk about everything else on Out of the Box Sports. Oh, there we go. Just waiting for my little schedule to come out. So Out of the Box Sports Entertainment has something for everybody. All the shows are listed. We got each team in the NFC East division has their own show. Find the night, find the time that has the show. The Big Blue Power Hour is Mondays at 8:30. The Sully Squad, which does Philly, is at 6 p.m. on Mondays. Obviously, your Commander's Gridiron is Tuesday nights at 6:30. Them boys, as much as I hate to say it, them 215 boys with Paul and Dave are Wednesdays at 9:30. But one of the new shows that we started last week is the NFC East Roundtable, the War Room. Where basically we preview this weekend's games for each of our respective teams and do a little bit of trash talking on the way. And then, of course, there's gaming, there's wrestling, there's the Las Vegas shows, there's the Notre Dame shows, pre-games, post-games for everybody, the whole 9 yards. But before I go for tonight, just as a friendly reminder, that up next with Joe Sullivan and Dave Yarnell is Extra Innings, where they talk all baseball, which is a really good show as the baseball season's winding down, getting ready to go into the playoffs. Go Baltimore Orioles. They're my team. And with that, like I said, we're going to kick back and enjoy week 2 of the NFL weekend coming up this weekend as the Washington Commanders take on the Denver Broncos at 4 p.m. Eastern in Denver. And with that, have a good evening and good night.